All right, so I think the first thing that we'll do is just if you could start off just introducing yourself, telling a little bit about like what you do with your farm, just kind of just a general overview of your farm.
You want my name and everything too?
Your name, like where we are, like you could even, anything you want to say about yourself and your farm.
Okay.
A little.
Whenever.
Yep.
My name's Allison Grimm. I farm here in Wright Township, Hillsdale County, Michigan. Actually in the western Lake Erie Basin.
What do you grow on your farm?
Well, this will be the third rotation we've had on this farm specifically. Soybeans, wheat, and corn for row crops. And then we always utilize a cover crop to help keep the soil in place. And I also will utilize that cover crop to graze poultry during the summer months.
We'll talk a little bit about how you got into raising poultry.
Actually, I guess we raised chickens, you know, growing up. We had a few for eggs. And then in my young adult career, I decided I always want my own meat, right? So I always had my own steers, own pigs, and I wanted my own chickens. And word spread, family and friends, hey, can we buy some meat chickens? Hey, can we order some meat chickens? And I says, yeah, okay. So it went from 50 to 100 to 200 to 500 to last year, being my 8th year of production, 1,000 head of broilers.
So you talked about your row crops, you talked about your chickens, what else are you?
Turkeys. I started that enterprise, I think the first year I raised the broilers, because who doesn't like farm fresh turkey, meaning me, again, raised 5 or 6 for the year for close family. And then that caught on as well. And I started thinking every farmer in the area raises beef and pork, but nobody raises poultry, at least in this area. I mean, you're hard pressed to find anybody. So I thought, well, maybe we can make this into something. And I would say primarily my first outlet was like a natural grocery store that's local, Manaplus and Waldron. They have a really good client base. So we just shared information through that customer base, and that's kind of what started the growth of the meat and the eggs as well. That's where I started selling eggs aside from off the farm.
So can you talk a little bit about how you planned, like the things that just kind of happen versus the things you plan, like the finances of how you think about what you're doing year to year?
Yeah, so obviously it started by raising for my own supply. Then demand grew, so I thought, okay, how many can I raise based on my time working full-time? Chickens were easier to get into financially because it does not take as much money to start up. And operating, I guess you would call it. If you're raising beef, you know, typically you have a lot of money in an animal for 12, 18, 24 months before you're getting a payback on that. Where with chickens, the turnaround for the meat is only 8 weeks, 8 to 10 weeks. Turkeys are 16 to 20 weeks, and obviously eggs are instant if you can get laying hens. And that's how I started the laying hens when a local farm friend decided to raise for Miller Poultry. They had to get rid of all of their own layers, so I took over their flock. So I had layers already laying eggs, and then I started from there on growing the pullets each year. So the eggs was kind of an instant turnaround. And then, like I said, the broilers only take about 8 to 10 weeks to get your money back.
Can you talk about how conservation fits into your farm, like the different conservation practices you use, and not just the practices, but how your farm fits into a food system?
Well, I would say cover crops is probably the big thing, because obviously you're utilizing that as food for your livestock, but you're also utilizing it as food for nature, for the wildlife. So you might notice, I've noticed over time, wherever there's cover crops planted, there's a lot more honeybees, there's a lot more frogs, spiders, snakes, salamanders, birds, than there is in a typical row crop rotation that doesn't have a cover crop over winter. So it helps build soil health, but it also helps build the health of the wildlife and insects around us, which are all part of the ecosystem and help things come full circle for providing a sustainable food source.
Can you talk a little bit about how far away your customers live from you, and like what kind of distance your customers are traveling, or how far your birds are traveling to get to from the farm to the plate?
So I try to be as local as possible. The laying hens, I try to hatch as many of my own as possible, but that doesn't always work, especially when egg demand is high, because I have to take the eggs away from the hens, you know, to sell them. But I try to hatch out my own, and then I'll have hens shipped in from local hatcheries in Michigan or Pennsylvania. The broilers come from Zeeland, Michigan. They're hatched same day. They show up the very next morning every single time. So their travel time is very short. And then from here, once they're ready to be processed, they travel about 60 miles to Homer, Michigan, which is just north of Hillsdale County. It's on the Calhoun Hillsdale County line. They get processed at a state licensed facility there, a small family operation. And then they're dispersed to customers, which I'm going to say probably 90% of my customer base is based out of the city of Hillsdale. A lot of Hillsdale College students, professors, staff, and then just regular people in Hillsdale. I don't sell off the farm as much as I used to, because I built my sales off the farmers market in Hillsdale. So it's a lot of time to be here. You know, to sell stuff off the farm, you have to be here a lot. It's very demanding time-wise, and working full-time, that makes it hard. So I dedicate my every single Saturday, 6 months out of the year, to take product to Hillsdale and sell it there.
Can you talk about some of your biggest challenges, how you overcame them, and if you have any mentors?
Challenges, I guess the one I would speak on is being a first-generation farmer is tough, because how in the world do you buy land, buy a farm, buy animals, buy all the equipment and not have debt, especially with interest rates the way they are right now? In the enterprises that I have on my farm, I guess I would say, my biggest competition are other people that have inherited grandma's farm or inherited mom and dad's farm. That's a huge asset to have in the back pocket. And so when you have to start everything from scratch, it makes it very difficult. And I have forced myself, I think, to have... I'm very strict on spending money because I need to know my profit line, okay? So it doesn't matter what Farmer Joe is selling his eggs for or what Farmer John is selling his chicken for. I have to know my profit margins, and that's what I sell them for. Because I can't do it for free, I have to make a farm payment, you know, a mortgage payment to pay for the land. I have to be able to have that operating fund to put crops in the ground. And to be able to do that with little to no debt is difficult, but you really have to know your profit margin, and that's probably my biggest struggle. second to that is I have to have the day job to help pay for the farm, to buy all the equipment and get started, and that takes away a lot of time from the farm, and anybody knows time away from the farm can get stressful.
So did you make use of any assistance programs for farmers to get started, or use a mentor?
I am more into putting my efforts and money back into rural America. So if we can teach people to shop local from the local farmer and not have to worry about all the legalities of doing it. I can't sell my eggs and chicken in a grocery store or in a little segment because they're not licensed. That's why I sell all direct to consumer. So there's been a few mentors along the way. I would say probably my biggest would be Denny Person. He farms in Camden Township in Hillsville County, and then also in Williams County, Ohio. And he's on the regenerative ag movement as well. They're into beef cattle and pigs. And we swap back information a lot. We're very much on the same farming practices as far as the no-till and the cover crops and implementing the livestock. So him and I go back and forth a lot. As far as the poultry, I don't have any mentors for that because this is just something that started on its own, and now I think what's weird is people constantly are asking me about chickens and poultry and how to do this, and it's weird for me to think that I am the chicken farmer. It's very hard for me to get that through my head that that's what it's become, which is kind of cool, but I wish I had a poultry mentor. But I've got dairy, beef, and pork all down. Those were had much more desires to be into dairy and beef, and here I am with poultry.
So this is sort of a two-part question. Did you start off with a vision for your farm to be this way? And if not, can you talk about how it changed? And then also, what is your vision for the future for your farm?
So any vision, I basically want to farm like it's 1960, okay? That's has been my ultimate goal. I love the tractors of that era. I love the farming method, the gardening method, everything about that era. I love the smaller farms, the more family feel, everybody stays on the farm, which is good because when you start out, you're gonna be small. But with that, diversity is number one, and with diversity comes livestock. I would not farm if I could not have animals. And I think that's why I've stuck with the chickens so long, is even though I'm not ready for the cattle and the pigs again yet, I'm ready for the chickens, and I've kind of put the icing on that cake and running with it. But I would not farm without animals because I want to raise food. That's my main goal.
Can you talk about that food? Like you talked about the people who buy your food. Like you talked a little bit about your customer base, but like the difference in the taste for the eggs and the chickens that you notice.
This is like deep. I gotta think about this for a second. So customers want to know where their food comes from. That's bottom line. That's first. Second is how it's raised. And not so much that it has to be organic or whatever the label may be, but as long as they know how it's raised and then it's being raised regeneratively. I think that word has become a thing recently. It makes a difference on the health of the animals, or the birds in this case, and it does have an effect on the texture and taste of eggs and meat. I think anybody can agree that if you've had eggs out of the grocery store, they do not compare to farm fresh eggs, no matter what they're fed. A lot of this has to do with how they're raised and how they're prepared for human consumption. My eggs, I do not wash. I do not refrigerate. They are fresh from the chicken and they go straight to the consumer within 5 days or less. So you will have a yolk that stands in the pan. The white will not run all over. It cooks faster and more even, and the flavor is there. It's not this pale yellow, runny, whatever the slime is that comes out of the grocery store. And I guess the biggest thing I've noticed is obviously, yes, the customers rave about the flavor of the eggs, the color of the yolk, the hardness of the shells. The other thing is how many people have come back and said, my kids will eat these eggs. And when you think about how much nutrients are in these eggs compared to others, when the chickens are able to be outside grazing like they're intended to do, they're uptaking a lot more minerals and nutrients and proteins through bugs and on the grass, you know, all the chlorophyll that's soaked up through the sunshine, etc., etc. They're loaded with much more nutrients than eggs from chickens that are not raised that way, say in confinement facilities that the chickens don't see daylight an entire day of their life. There's been a lot of research that shows eggs from chickens raised out on pasture are lower in cholesterol, lower in fat, higher in protein.
How would you advise someone to get started doing what you have?
I kind of toy back and forth on this because I want to say you have to be dedicated to it because it takes time. Then again, getting into chickens, I think you could get in and out pretty easily because there's always somebody that wants to get into chickens, right? So coming back to the profitability thing, when I started building this enterprise and I keep getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the equipment and the hen houses and the mobile coops, I always tell myself that all these items are saleable, except for this huge hen house, probably not. But everything else is probably saleable to somebody that wants to get started. But going back to being dedicated is Rome wasn't built in a day. It takes time, but it's not as hard, in my opinion, as getting set up for cattle and pigs. I've got some nicer chicken tractors, the mobile chicken coops that I purchased from a place in LaGrange that were obviously built for that specifically. You don't have to buy those fancy chicken coops. You can make homemade ones for a little bit of nothing. I mean, we used some scrap lumber, scrap tarp, a little bit of chicken wire, and I picked up some wheelbarrow tires at Tractor Supply, and I used some chain and some old garden hose for the handles, and those work just fine too. It's really not a huge investment to get started. I would say just know your profit margin and know your customer base for where you're located. Some people do really well selling off farms. Some people do really well taking them to town. As far as the meat or the eggs, eggs are definitely easier than meat in the fact that they're easier to have around, they're easier to keep around, their death loss is a lot lower, and then they produce you a product year-round. It's very hard to graze meat chickens in the winter time, but yeah, I would say go for it. The diversity they add to the farm's phenomenal. They love to eat bugs. I'd say they add an asset to the farm, just in that way. And they don't really cost, they cost you some time, but they don't cost a lot of money to raise.
One thing that we did talk about when we were on the phone call was stacking enterprises. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think it's actually like a Gabe Brown tactic, I'll call it, as far as the stacking enterprises on the farm. If you are starting out or you're small, it doesn't matter if it's 4 acres or 20 acres or 100, diversity helps pay the bills. So you got to think about what you can profit. Oh crap, edit that. So yeah, second enterprises, figuring out how much you can profit on the farm. Some of this is going to depend on your location. Some of it is going to depend on maybe the type of land you have. If you have really hilly land, might be great to graze it, right? If you have nice flat land like this, great for row crops. I could never not grow row crops because how can you not? But this nice flat fertile soil is also great for growing vegetables. So maybe allocate out, you know, 1/4 of an acre for whatever vegetable or fruit fits your fancy, like asparagus, potatoes, green beans, whatever it may be. Asparagus is kind of where I started. Again, going back to nobody else has it. It's kind of a specialty crop that people really, really like. So we've got about 1/4 acre of asparagus, which does not sound like a lot, but that has the potential to profit quite a bit of money for the year. So you've got vegetables and fruit to your row crops, to your animals. If you've already got chickens, why not throw on turkeys? It's all about, I guess, like I said, what fits your farm. Honeybees, I'm just dabbling in that right now, but honeybees are another great enterprise to put on because you have them on the farm. They pollinate your crops and they just kind of hang out and buzz around. They're great company. But if you're taking the time to go to the market, especially if you're going up there for one item, it may not be worth your time. But if you can add 6 items or 7 items that are valuable, then it'll be better worth your time. And it all comes back to making your land as profitable as possible.